I don't know how these things happen, but they do. Tummy tucks. You have expenditures like, oh, let me see here. Why don't we, hey, I know. Why don't we put some monkeys in a cage, real monkeys. She got it. Why don't we put some monkeys in a cage and give them some cocaine? What a great idea! Yeah! And we'll film it. And then we'll give it to these guys we call scientists and behavioral scientists. And they'll look at it and they'll go like, hey, look, monkeys high on cocaine. Whee, let's write about it. The federal government, the stimulus package actually spent $282,000 to do that. I'm not, folks, you can't make this stuff up. So, you have 18 enumerated powers, and they're not to bomb brown people in Libya, and they're not to provide drugs for addicted monkeys that need their fix of cocaine. So we've established this. Well, they also weren't, there was this thing called I think it's the First Amendment, something about freedom of speech. I think I'm right about that one. There's also this thing called the First Amendment. The Alien and Sedition Act said, look, if you speak out against the Adams administration and we catch you, we will put you in jail. And we will try you on federal charges of sedition. That's how the sedition part got in there. And so Jefferson wrote this thing called the Virginia Resolution. James Madison wrote the Kentucky Resolution. And what it says is that if anybody tries to use federal money to appropriate cocaine for a monkey's cocaine habits, that the state of Texas has the right to nullify. Let's say the monkeys were here in Tyler. Don't take that to mean anything. Not saying anything about you, Tyler, Texas, nothing. Let's just say the monkeys were here in Tyler. You would then, your legislature could say, we're not going to allow you to make us film those monkeys sniffing the coke that we had to pay for. We're going to nullify that law. I would think that James Madison would know a lot more about the Constitution than Rachel Maddow would. So this is how you get the principle of nullification. Now, we have this thing called Obamacare, right? Don't believe for a second that that federal judge is going to uphold his order and that the federal courts are not going to let that thing slide in. If you take the bribe money on Medicare and Medicaid, you got to take the bribe money on Obamacare. It's simple as that. With all the requirements and all the taxes and the must purchase, that's all coming your way. The Supreme Court has not validated an act of Congress since 1938. So, could the Texas legislature nullify it? I believe you actually had a bill last year or 2 years ago when Obamacare was being talked about to do so. How many of you have called your state representatives and demanded Obamacare be, or the Health Care Affordability Act, as I believe it's supposed to be called, that it be nullified? Everybody? No. We get golf clap. I was expecting, yeah! Yeah! Yeah, golf clap. I think this is something that you really ought to consider doing. Seriously consider. To leave the federal, I mean, just think about the insanity of this, folks. To leave the federal courts in charge of divining what the extent of their own powers are. Is that a smart thing to do? That's like leaving the proverbial child in the candy store and letting he or her define the extent of how much candy you can eat mean. Don't eat too much. Well, he didn't define it. That jar looks good. So does that one. I got an empty pocket here. Give me some of that. Nullification. Jefferson, Madison, far smarter than any of the nitwits that we call congressmen today. I say they were correct. Nullify is another way to get out of it. That's two ways, okay? Number three. This is the one that most people do not like the most. They'll tolerate it, and they'll talk about it, but they'll go, bah, you guys are crazy. You're going to ruin everything. Article 5. Anyone know what's in Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution? All my listeners do. How about you guys in the back? Know Article 5, U.S. Constitution? What does it say? It says that when 2/3 of the state legislatures get really angry and decide that the nitwits in Mordor and the Potomac River are thieves and criminals, Gohmert exempted, and you want to do something about it and change the system, which is what Article 5 does, You people in the states, great George Mason put this in the Federal Convention on the last day of the convention in 1787. You, the states, can call a convention to amend it. Now, it's not a constitutional convention. This is brainwashing. This is not what the John Birch Society has told you it is. It is an amendment convention. It is only there to propose an amendment. Oh, I don't know, something sensible like a balanced budget amendment. Something sensible like repealing the 16th Amendment. Everybody for that? Repealing the 17th Amendment, returning the election of senators back to the state legislatures? I think that's a smart thing to do. How about this one? How about an amendment that says that every 2 years, the states, by 2/3 of a vote, or by a majority vote, can convene a council, and if the Supreme Court does something stupid and unconstitutional that really angers the reverend back there and says your kids can't pray in a public school, you have a meeting to rescind the Supreme Court's edict. You just repeal it. Simple as that. You know, all you need is a majority. This is an amendment we have proposed in an Article 5. Imagine this. If we had this power today, there wouldn't be an argument about whether or not the children of Tyler, Texas that go to a public school can have a benediction before they start their day. There would be no argument about at a high school football game that you could have a prayer. There would be no argument whatsoever, none, zero, about where God could be in the public square, unless the people of Texas said they don't want God in their square. I don't think the Reverend's going to be happy about that. These are things we can do, folks. We gotta do these things. You can't rely on Congress. It is broken. It is corrupt. No matter how good the people are we send, he can't do it all himself. He needs your help. And the states and the citizens of the states got to be the engine that does this. You can tell I'm a little fired up about this. Because we're going to lose, like Congressman Gohmert said, we're going to lose it. We're going to lose all of it, the whole thing. But he also said something very, very cool that I like. With great crisis comes great opportunity. We have an opportunity. We don't need a majority. We don't have to have 51% of our fellow citizens. I say we need about 10% real loud people. Are you loud? Let me hear you loud. We need 10%. That vocal minority. When John Adams went to Philadelphia in 1774, he thought it was hopeless. Lost cause. Got up and spoke to the convention delegates there in a place called Carpenter's Hall. Most people don't know that either. The first conference was held in a meeting room, a Lions Club, a Rotary Club of the day, basically.
Good, how are you?
That's how our founders started. Oh, they also started in bars, too, taverns. You may want to rethink that whole Dry County thing. I'm not saying, just saying. Especially when I come to town. Read just one day exemption. Come on, just one day.
Hi, how are you doing?
John Adams could not speak. This is the man that we all revere as a great founder. Couldn't speak. Stuttered, stammered his way through. Finally, Patrick Henry got up and what my worthy colleague is trying to say, or at least I think he's endeavoring to say, is our government is dissolved, Henry thundered in his trademark voice. What did he mean? He said, we are in a state of nature, sir. You know what a state of nature? This is how desperate they thought times were. So our times are as desperate, but no more so. They thought that they didn't have any government because they had tyranny. That they were not being represented, and that there was nothing they could do to get their representation back. From that day, they decided that they would meet at Independence Hall. They needed a bigger room. And they began to meet there. 1775, John Adams famously wrote a letter to his wife, Abigail, and told her, man, Abby, this doesn't look good. You know, I'm a Bostoner, you're a Bostoner, it doesn't look good, Abigail. You know, up in this Congress here, we got 1/3 Tory, we got 1/3 timid, 1/3 too blue. He had a third. He thought he had 1/3 of his fellow legislators that were sent to the first Continental Congress. Is that 1/3 a majority? Now, Is it even a workable minority? You know, not according to the way we do things today. 2 years later, on July the 2nd, 1776, something wonderful happened, didn't it? Got this thing called the Declaration of Independence. Most people don't read the second paragraph. Most people stop at the flourish of life, liberty, and pursuing happiness, and all that being created equal, and all that stuff. That's preamble. That has no force of law, none whatsoever. The only thing that mattered in that document that's legal, and is still legal today, is the last paragraph that says, these United Colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. They are absolved of all allegiance to the British Crown, and all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. They have the right to conclude peace, contract alliances, declare war, and do all things that states may of right do. They declared themselves to be countries. Texas is still a country today. Your forefathers guaranteed that. 56 men signed their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to that document. That means something, man. That stuff means something, and it should mean something today. So we're now through two pieces, or third piece. We're in Article 5 now. That's how wise these guys were. And they were wise because they read, and they were humble, and yes, they were men of God. That whole thing about Franklin being a deist, some of these other men, oh, Washington was a deist. Go read his diaries and tell me how much of a deist he was. When he's always thanking the Lord, the Almighty, the searcher of hearts. Name your metaphor for the Christ, for the God, for blessing and having fortuitous, smiling fortuitously on our fortunes and what have you. These men were men of God, all of them. Some of them may not have practiced, but they were men of God. So you're at Article 5, right? That's three things. Now, the fourth thing that you can do. How many dads do we have here? Great show of hands. This is all on your shoulders. The priest told me 2 weeks ago that a father's job is to get his children to heaven. That is the job of a father. Get your children to heaven. That is your job. That is what you are charged to do. Well, let me give you another one. How about, while you're getting your kids to heaven, why don't you buy them some freedom? Why don't you make a purchase of liberty? How do you do that? Well, you work on those three things that we just talked about. Don't worry about Louis. Louis is going to vote your way. Let him do what he's going to do. And I know he supports me in this. Work here locally. Change this government. Change begins with you. You can change that city hall. You can change that legislature in Austin. You can change the world. Fathers, guys, you gotta lead. And it may be something simple like, I don't know, on a hot day wearing a pair of pants. Dressing up a little bit. Simple things. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Yes, sir. No, sir. Lead by example.